Is former Children's Commissioner and now Chair of the Commission on Young Lives, Anne Longfield. Good afternoon to you, Anne.
Hello there.
I mean, it's just a horrible, horrible story, this, an absolute tragedy. We don't know the exact circumstances of what's gone on. We know that the police and the social workers will be looking at what they could have done more, and clearly a lot more. This was a child who was supposed to be looked in on once a week. We don't know the circumstances of that, but we do know that the mother and father were not together, and we do know that it was known that the father had a heart condition, and we also know from what the mother had said, Sarah Piesse, and I wish no ill will to anybody. You lose a child, that's the worst possible thing that could happen to anyone. But a lot of people, let's be honest, we all think, the moment we saw the story, we're going, where was mum? And even if you're not living with your child, why were you not in contact with your child? Why did you not know? Why did you not look in on your child or call? And when you didn't get an answer, why didn't you go to the door? And frankly, if it was me, batter down the door if necessary to find out that your child was safe. So blaming it all on social services, all the police is all very well, but ultimately, safety of my child as a mum, down to me, I would say. What do you make of this case and what we know about it?
Yeah, so I mean, it's so utterly sad, and the more you hear about it, and the tragedy of having a fridge door that's just too high, and the isolation of that little boy, our hearts obviously go out to them. But we do know that both the police and social services are now conducting their own reviews on this. They both say rapidly. Social workers did go back to the house a number of times. Social workers can't get access themselves, so rely on the police to ensure there is access. Now, the child was on a level of vulnerability that meant they got more frequent visits once a week.
And once a week now shows quite a level of vulnerability, because we know social services are incredibly short-staffed. So if they're visiting a child once a week, they have serious concerns.
Yeah. So I guess the police were notified straight away at the beginning of January. But the question is, did the police understand that this was a high level of vulnerability? And do they understand what that means? Because if you've got a 2-year-old child, it's very urgent if they're vulnerable. If there's any question over their well-being, 2-year-olds are very, very young and just don't have the ability to be able to sustain themselves for any length of time. So there are certainly many, many questions to be answered here, but ultimately at the heart of it, you've got a little boy with his life ahead of him who has sadly died.
I mean, it's just awful. It's the sort of story I think a lot of parents, you see it, you hear it, and you go, oh, I don't even, there but for the grace of God, and and you don't even want to think about it. This happens, and it doesn't sound like, again, we don't know any of the ins and outs about why this child was considered vulnerable. We don't know whether there was whether there was an issue of neglect rather than anything else from the family. That's what I think we would assume. But at the end of the day, once a child is put on a register and is supposed to be under the watch of social services, and we've seen this again and again with cases where children who were actually victims of their parents, of their violence, actually battered to death, broken bones, bruises that have gone on from batterings from month after month, even young babies, that they're on a list. People are aware, the authorities are aware, grandparents, exes have got in touch and said, for the love of God, my child is at risk, please, or my grandchild, please help. And nothing is done. We're always told that wonderful phrase, lessons will be learned. We know they're never learned. But is it right to criticise the authorities? Is there an issue with them in terms of the lack of resources, the lack of personnel, the lack of training? What's going on?
Yeah. So I think, this is against a backdrop of, hugely escalating costs of children's social care. A placement for a child in a residential children's home now, it's on average about £300,000 a year, enormous amounts. And of the councils that are now warning that they're about to go bust, of which there are many, about half of those will say that's because of the cost of children's social care. So what we've seen over the last 10 years is demands increased incredibly high in many areas, and at the same time the cost has increased dramatically. Now, against a backdrop of huge fiscal restraint, that means only one thing, that support starts to get rationed. It's much more likely now to be more available at crisis point rather than as things start to become apparent. And of course, what families that are living in very adverse situations need is for someone to be working alongside them, not doing things to them, not suggesting that anyone was in this case, but people they can turn to, people that can help them tackle their problems head on, can help them deal with any of their own vulnerabilities. And that's what we've got to get back to, this radical reset. So we work alongside families, we support them, and we stop them where possible falling into crisis.
But having the resources to be able to do that sooner instead of waiting for it to get into crisis, as you say, is absolutely crucial. But and again, if
it will send huge amounts of money in the long term.
as always, prevention.
Cheap option.
But we are
of course.
Yeah, but we are also, from experts I've spoken to this field, we're entering, the second or third generation of, parents who haven't been parented, having kids, and they don't know how to parent, whatever the issues are. We've got massive scale of drug and alcohol abuse, and a lot of that going on, and going on often with women. I don't know I have no information on what the situation is with this particular mother, but it's very unusual for a child to live with the father and not the mother. We know that, but when we are seeing that drug and alcohol abuse in mothers as well as in fathers, in often cases, children are at great risk. And if it's 300k to take them into care and local social services don't have that money, those kids are left. They are neglected by not just their parents, but also by society until there's a crisis, sometimes until after there's a crisis, and often after something even as tragic as this has happened.
About 1 in 6, we research this and actually analyze the figures. Around 1 in 6 children are actually living in homes where their parents have their own vulnerabilities, be that mental health problems or addictions or problems with poor mental health and domestic violence in some occasions.
That statistic is absolutely horrific.
1 in 6, and sometimes, of course, it can be all of those. Now, that family is going to need a lot of help to tackle some of those problems, to be able to provide the kind of security and stability that their children need. But it's help that's not going to be, over within 10 minutes. This is long-term support, people in the community that can help it. And it doesn't always have to be a professional all the time. Part of what the help can be is to help, create a community network, create parent buddies, people can have around and turn to, if you like, when, they don't have their social worker to hand. So I think we have to get real about those figures. And that I've continued to push governments to see that this is something that is unavoidable in the end of the day, that we have to reset this. And this is what parents want. Most parents whose children are involved in children's services are involved because they're living in adversity, and we can prevent that getting worse, and that's what ultimately.
And I completely understand. It's not just about wagging the finger and going, do better. People, they often themselves have grown up with abuse, with domestic abuse. They're in a relationship now, drink drugs. Their lives have been rotten, and not everyone starts out with the same sort of solid background as many of us will have. That said, when we talk about help for a lot of these people, can I just say what a lot of us are thinking? Maybe some of the help we should be giving these people is contraception. Maybe there are a lot of people who we really should say, we really think it's a good idea for you not to have children, or at least once you've had children, not to have any more children, because you're not fit to take care of yourself, let alone a child. And we need to be putting the children first. And we know that social services have partly financially and partly also because of their sort of ethics. Their view is that children should be with their mums unless the mum is doing the worst thing to them, violent assault, sexual assault, you need to be with your mum. And I don't think the evidence actually bears that out a lot of the time.
Well, I think that the vast majority of parents themselves want to be good parents, but they often want
If you want to be a good parent, but you also want heroin, I'm sorry, heroin's going to win every time.
Of course. Well, there are, of course, desperate situations where people and also making good choices is something that, really, can be supported as well.
Yeah.
We need people who have that option of making good choices, whether that's about forming, good relationships or about planning in terms of, your own agency over your children.
Yeah.
But there are some fantastic projects that work in that way to really help parents regain that control over their lives. And ultimately, you know, we are going to need them to be able to manage their own lives, to be able to support their own children. So I'm a big fan of having family workers, not there as soft options or to, you know, pander after people, but to say, look, there are, you know, I can help you, but you're going to have to go with me. Are you up for it? Because if you are, I can help work with you, and we can see where we get here.
Nice to end on a positive note. Thank you. Always so good to talk to you. You've been such a champion for children.
Pleasure.
You really have, certainly through lockdowns as well. Anne Longfield, former Children's Commissioner, thank you very much indeed. And as I say, I must say she's also now the chair of the Commission on Young Lives.